Okay, let's go.
Thinking, meaning and why it matters. We welcome you to the world of critical thinking. This is a course that will help you develop great thinking skills. That will help you in a variety of ways. You know, as humans, it is our nature to think, and that is what differentiates us from non-human creatures. As we all know, most often our thinking is biased, it's distorted, partial, shallow, and prejudiced. Yet the very core of whatever we do in our daily life depends on the quality of our thoughts. If we want to improve upon our life, then we need to improve upon our thoughts. How do we improve upon our thoughts? This will be achieved by studying the course we call critical thinking and practical reasoning. So today we are going to look at the definition of critical thinking and why it matters in the life of every human being, especially students. Now this course is designed in a way that will stimulate the students to think very deeply, rationally, and also clearly. It will offer you all the abilities to analyze issues critically and to communicate effectively. That is why what we are going to do is basically on critical thinking and its relevance to independent decision making, effective communication, and critical evaluation of arguments and claims. We are looking at exactly what critical thinking is, what it entails, and how to develop excellent critical thinking skills. Let's look at these scenarios which will help us to explain what critical thinking is. Have you thought about the clever questions of some journalists? What about the clever investigative approach used by detectives in crime scene analysis? You know someone who is good at listening to all sides of a particular dispute, deciding what is correct and what is not? What about someone who is possessing open-mindedness and is willing to abandon alternatives that are not working? If you have come across any of these instances, then you obviously know how these people are engaging in critical thinking. Let's also look at some instances which you might be familiar with. You know someone who is close-minded to new and relevant information. Someone who thinks those who disagree with him or her are enemies. Someone who is very opinionated, who denies the fact that other ideas have merit. Now if you look at these two scenarios, you realize that these two people have different intellectual capabilities. So before then, let me first of all list all the core critical thinking skills. Then we look at it one after the other. Because these critical thinking skills will form the bedrock upon which a good definition of critical thinking rests on. So some core critical thinking skills. And one. Now, this core critical thinking skills was taken from a scholar called Peter A. Fascio in his book, which was published in 2011. The first core critical thinking skills that was espoused by this scholar is we have interpretation. That the first core critical thinking skills. Well, analysis and well, inference.
Subscribe.
Let's elucidate one after the other. What is interpretation as a core critical thinking skill? It is the understanding of the expression and the significance of wide variety of experiences, situations, data, judgments, and conventions, beliefs, rules, procedures, or criteria. So the first core critical thinking skill that an individual should possess is interpretation. That is, anytime you listen to someone's argument or claims, the first thing that a critical thinker must have is being able to understand the expression, the rules, the criteria that the individual or those statement is trying to talk about. That's the first core critical thinking skills. The second critical thinking skills is analysis. The individual or the critical thinker should have the analytic skill. What do we mean by analysis in critical thinking? It is the identification of the intended and actual inferential relationships among statements, questions, concepts, and descriptions. That's what we say the person is making analysis. That is, you look at the connectivity that exists between the statements. The connection that this has to do with this has to do with that. Then we are breaking things apart. That's what we call the analysis. This is the core critical thinking skill that every individual should have. The next one is inference. What do you mean by inference? It is the identification of the element needed to draw reasonable conclusions, form hypotheses, consider relevant information, and deduce the consequences flowing from the data or principles. So here, to draw inference means that you are looking at a reasonable statement which are within the whole narrative in order for you to draw reasonable conclusions and assumptions from the statement that you come across. That is what we say. A critical thinker is obviously, engaging in what we call inference, or the person is drawing inferences from such statement. Now, next one is evaluation. To evaluate a claim means to assess the credibility of statements or information, making judgments in a clear, objective, and thoughtful manner. So, evaluation here means that we are looking at the credibility. The credibility is looking at the claim itself. We shall talk about that, how to evaluate. We look at the basic rudimentary knowledge for evaluating arguments. Claim, and then the source. The source of the information. That is one of the core critical thinking skills. Evaluation, testing the credibility. Who is saying it? The person saying it, who is he? Where is the claim coming from? Does the claim conflict with our personal observation and our background information? These are one of the criteria or a skill that the critical thinker must have. The next one is explanation. What do we mean by explanation? It is the cogent and coherent presentation of one's own reasoning or opinion on other people's account of an event. So when we say explanation, basically as a critical thinker or a logical person, when you come across information after interpreting it, understanding all the pros and cons, making the analysis, drawing inferences, and evaluating that claim, you may want to pass judgments. You may want to pass your own reasoning on those accounts, and that's what we call explanation. To explain means it is a cogent and coherent presentation of one's own reasoning on other people's account of a particular event. That is another important critical thinking skill that every logical person should possess. The last one has to do with self-regulation. As critical reasoners or thinkers, there is a need for you to monitor your own cognitive activities, your own thinking, in order not for you to be a shoddy thinker. So let's look at the technicalities involved in what we call self-regulation. It is the self-conscious effort of monitoring one's own cognitive activities, the elements used in those activities, and the result deduced from them. So, before we can actually define critical thinking, these are the core critical thinking skills that we should have. First one is with interpretation. As a critical thinker, you should be able to understand your opponent's claim, his argument. That's the first skill. Make analysis, make draw inferences, you evaluate the claim, then you will try to years, I've captured some insight as to how critical thinking will be defined. So now we want to move on to the definition that have been given by some scholars in the world of critical thinking. In order for us to make our lectures credible, there's a need for us to cite or make references as to where we obtain all this information. I need to write the definition very clearly on the board. The first definition that we give for critical thinking is a definition from an Open University. Open University Handbook of Critical Thinking. According to the Open University Handbook of Critical Thinking, they define critical thinking as a practice of critically examining. So according to the Open University Handbook of Critical thinking is defined as a practice of critically examining ideas, evaluating them against what you know, and making decisions about their merit while maintaining an objective position. One of the requirements of critical thinking or characteristics of critical thinking is that the individual should be objective. What do you mean by objectivity? Being objective means that the tendency to see facts as they are, not as we think it should be. That is what we say, that a person is engaging in objectivity, free of bias and prejudice. So this is one of the credible definitions that we have for critical thinking. Some also say critical thinking is basically providing rational reason why you support a particular conclusion. So this is one of the definitions that we can give. There are a lot of other definitions of critical thinking. But as a logical person, so you critically examine the ideas that you come across, you evaluate them against what you know already, and then making decisions about their merit while maintaining an objective position. That's the definition given by Open University Handbook of Critical Thinking. Now let's use some scenario over here. I want you to imagine you are buying a second-hand car. Try to use your critical thinking skills that you gained before, particularly analysis and evaluation, when buying your car. Now, if you are going to buy a home-use car or second-hand car, what are some of the critical thinking skills that are employed? The analytic skills will be this: checking the tires, check the brake, and then the steering and everything. This is the analysis that you will do. The evaluation is by checking the good and bad aspect of the car. Then you can begin very well to see what you are buying is wrong. Another evaluation skill is you check from the company that you are buying the car from, who is selling the car to, and so on and so forth. These are all skills that we employ. So we have discussed what critical thinking is. We have given some core critical thinking skills. Now the question that we need to ask ourselves is critical thinking important to human beings? Let's look at it one after the other. So relevance of critical thinking. We are now going to look at some of the importance of thinking critically. Relevance of critical thinking. Critical thinking is important in our everyday activity. That is, the ability to think critically and rationally is important in our everyday activities. Whether you work in the military, you work in education, you work in a bank, you are a normal person going about your everyday duty, your ability to think critically and rationally is extremely important because it helps you to solve problems in a very systematic way, to avoid losing your emotions in dealing with issues. So critical thinking is very relevant in our life in such a way that it helps us to solve problems systematically in our everyday activities. Let's look at the second importance of critical thinking. Critical thinking promotes creativity. Coming out with a new idea does not only mean that you come up with something anyhow. It requires that the idea that you are bringing out is a solution to the problem at hand. And since you possess critical thinking skills, it enhances your ability to be creative, to generate new ideas, important information, which will help in solving problems. So, critical thinking, or we say anytime that you take a decision and then you weigh all options to see which of them is most practical and useful, then we say the person is automatically exercising his or her critical thinking disposition. And because of this, it will lead to creativity. When we think critically and we rationalize things, we always develop the ability to come up with new solutions to problems that we encounter in our everyday life. 3. Critical thinking is relevant for self-examination. There is no doubt that every human being lives his life based on a particular philosophy of life. And in order for us to live meaningful lives, our values and beliefs need to be what? Verified objectively. That's why a philosopher once said, an unexamined life is not worth living. Every logical person have to what? Do a thorough and rational verification of what he or she believes to be a proper way of living. That's what basically critical thinking is all about. So anyone who thinks critically, you realize that you can self-examine yourself. You can do a self-examination to see that the way I'm living my life, is it worth it? Is it rationally justified? So this is one of the importance of critical thinking. It is relevant for examination. Now, the next one is science and governance requires critical thinking. Critical thinking underpins science and governance. In science, critical thinking is required for the formulation of hypotheses, conducting sophisticated experiments, and then arriving at a well-justified conclusions. Governance here also requires citizens who can think critically, pursue crucial policies, which will benefit almost everybody without any bias or corruption. Because critical thinking deals with rational evaluation of what? Ideas in the face of evidence and good reasoning. Critical thinker will always engage in rational justification. So one of the importance of critical thinking is that it helps science and what governance itself. If individuals practicing science and ruling a country are highly involved in critical thinking. That is that critical thinking promotes racial, political, and religious tolerance. So one of the benefits that you obtain from studying critical thinking or equipping our intellect with critical thinking is that it promotes racial, political, and religious tolerance. What do you mean by that? Since critical thinking involves objective assessment of fact and fairness and attribution of ideas, a critical mind will always tolerate divergent opinion in order to allow for human flourishing and peace. Because if somebody believes in X and you believe in Y, as a critical thinker, you will not use your belief to pass upon what is actually taking place. But what you do is this: you objectively assess the person's arguments or belief that you don't really accept, then later you can come to well-justified conclusion. And as a result of that, there will be a human flourishing and peace. So these are some of the relevance of critical thinking. So we will end our first lesson here on critical thinking. Then in our subsequent videos or tutorials, we move on to other aspects of the topics. Meet you again in our next session. Thank you very much.